Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey My Mother's Son podcast. Today, I'm joined with Mike Huber from the Freshman Foundation. Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. So, Mike is, as I said, the founder of the Freshman Foundation, which is he also hosts a podcast called the Freshman Foundation. I was on his show, and we connected so well that we decided, you know what, let's keep this conversation going. Why don't you come on my show as well? But Mike, just introduce yourself to my listeners real quick before we, get into the conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So like Dan said, my name is Mike Huber. I'm a certified mental performance consultant. So in the sports psychology field, working specifically with young athletes, high school and college, primarily on the mental side of sport. And the Freshman Foundation, as Dan mentioned, is something that is really an idea that I sort of came up with on my own about sort of helping athletes, young athletes, manage the transition from high school to college athletics specifically. So, that's kind of where the name Freshman Foundation comes from. But really, my mission is to help young people, be the best they can be, and do that through mental training.
Love that. And so, for my listeners, I think just by that introduction, you can understand why Mike and I connected so easily and so quickly. Is that we both had that passion of helping kids. Obviously, 30 years of coaching for myself, in the baseball and softball space, and just running the sports organization. Understand the importance of what youth sports does for kids um, if it's coached the right way. And as Mike had mentioned in his intro, there he's also a mental health coach, mental performance coach, but it can also be a mental health coach. It's all together, but when you say mental health, all of a sudden people are like,
Yeah.
ooh, hold on a second. But it's something that we need to keep talking about. This is the third show I've done on this topic. So I love getting different perspectives and points of view. And, before we record, Mike and I were talking, it's like, parents are so quick to go out there and drop $100 on a hitting lesson or a pitching lesson, or basketball clinic or whatever the case is. But they don't put a whole lot of time and resources into making sure that their kid is okay mentally. So, first of all, Mike, what made you want to get into that space of mental performance and helping, make sure that, the fourth wheel on the vehicle, is rolling as good as the other three?
Yeah. So, sports psychology is my second career. I spent almost 20 years in sort of the business world doing consulting work. And I'd say probably like 5 or 6 years ago, I was still kind of at the tail end of that. And I just was unfulfilled with the work that I was doing. And so I started to think about, what the next part of my life, professional life might look like. And, I always said that I wanted to do something in sports, and I never really pursued that because I just didn't see a path, or it didn't seem realistic to me. And then once I started to look into a little bit more, I really had developed later in my life a passion for helping other people. That was sort of like what I knew I wanted to do, is help others in a very generic way. And so when I put the two together, it just made the most sense to me that this field of helping young people sort of manage the demands and stresses associated with sport was something that was frankly right up my alley. And as a former athlete, as a high school baseball player who's pretty good, I think one of the biggest downfalls I had was the mental side of my game. I just was very up and down. I was very, hard on myself, and I never really could sort of, rebound from, challenges that I had, and slumps or whatever you want to call it. And I felt like, having someone to talk to and work with somebody on that side of sport, I felt like there would be a lot of value there. So, it hasn't proven me wrong. I love what I do, every single day now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, was there any particular moment throughout your playing career that, as you reflected back, was kind of that aha moment as to, again, man, I wish I had somebody like this. This is why I want to get into this field, because I know what that would have done for me. I want to be able to do it for others. What was that aha moment for you?
So it was my senior year of high school baseball. And so we're going back, we're going back almost 30 years now, which is hard to say. But,
Uh,
I started out my season like absolutely on fire. I was probably hitting 500 to start the season, hit a grand slam in the first game. I was just like on fire, could not get out. I was seeing the ball like a beach ball. And then all of a sudden, at some point, it turned, and I went through, and I think it was an 0 for 20, where I could not hit anything. And I probably struck out 10 out of those 20 times. It was just a disaster. And I finished my career, that season was the end of my career, very strongly, but it wasn't until I really hit like rock bottom to the point where like there was nowhere else to go. I couldn't go any further down. That I just sort of was like, well, now I have no choice. I'm just going to go out and play because it doesn't matter anymore because it's been so bad. There's nothing I can do. Like if I could have found a way to stem that tide, after a few bad at bats or even two bad at bats or five bad at bats, and it didn't have to be 0 for 20, my season could have been very different. And that could have led me to having a different, trajectory in baseball. It could have been like, hey, you could have played college baseball because you had a really great senior year and somebody wants to bring you on board. Instead, I was just, an average to above average player. And it wasn't because I couldn't hit or I couldn't field. It was because I couldn't kind of manage the stress and the bumps in the road. And, it made me like every time I thought about doing this work, that was sort of the one thing I always came back to. It was almost like, one of the things you regret, like you wish it would have been different.
yeah, yeah. So, as I said before, there still is this stigma around
Mm-hmm.
mental health, and um, it's getting better. I will gladly admit that it's getting better, but I still think we have a long way to go. When you know you look and you see like what happened with Simone Biles in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that in and of itself, that one kind of called incident in and of itself, brought a huge amount of awareness to mental health and mental well
Mm-hmm.
for athletes. So many athletes this past year. I remember, and I think there was a young catcher at JMU who committed suicide and was just like on fire, having a great season, and like who knew? So you know we're still not where we need to be. So how do you think we get to a point where this is more part of the conversations? I mean, like how many more Simone Biles instance, how many more young athletes, I hate to say it this way, need to take their life before someone says, man, we really need to focus on this as much, if not more, than the X's and O's and technical components of sports?
Well, I think it's a hard question to answer. Certainly, I think those incidents, the tragic ones and the really high profile ones, help to shed light on it. Um, but I think it has to happen, frankly, from the bottom up, right? In terms of every single day, making it okay for athletes and any young person, but we're talking about sports, right? Any athlete, making it normalized, making it acceptable to come forward and say, hey, like I'm not in a good place. Hey, I need help. And I think the truth of the matter is that we're still in a place where there's the suck it up mentality, right? Whether it's a physical injury or whether there's some sort of mental challenge. I think it's still the natural inclination is like, I need to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to disappoint my parents or I don't want to worry them or I don't want to lose my spot or I can handle it myself. And I think I think that has to kind of come from the bottom up, right? Because people live their lives every day. You see TV and you hear interviews and you see all this stuff. But the reality is the person who's depressed and thinking about taking their own life is having a hard time getting out of bed every single day. And it's not a highlight, it's real life, right? And I think being able to make it okay for them to talk about it. And we're starting to see that, I think, with young people. I think young people are starting to come out and say, hey, like, I'm not willing to go through this meat grinder that is high profile, youth sport, college sport. I'm not willing to go through that at the risk of my life. And I think that that's probably the sign that, the system is going to have to change, because you're going to start to lose kids, because it's like, why is this worth it? It's not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another component of that comes down to coaching and
It does.
coaches, really understanding the influence they have on their players. I mean,
Yeah.
I know when I coached, man, it was just, and I don't know that I intentionally was thinking about how I interacted with players as to how it affected their mental well being. But I think any player that played for me, you know, knew pretty well that I had their back, that I loved them, I cared about them as a human being, um, and coming from where I came from, our organization ran a lot of tournaments
Mm-hmm.
on weekends that are complex, and man, you just saw like the best and the worst of the coaching world,
Mm-hmm.
and these guys were out there, with 12 and 13-year-old kids and just, in drill sergeant mode. And, look, I'm not saying I never yelled at a player. I have, but you have to be like, you got to pick your spots, like if I ever got to a point where I raised my voice, like my players at that point knew, like,
Right.
all right, we need to make some changes here.
Yeah.
um, because, you know, they knew that I cared about them, um, you know, in every aspect of their life, on and off the playing field. And there's just too many, you know, young coaches out there now that don't get that and don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
how important that is. And yeah, it's just something that, you know, you talked about, it starts from the bottom up, but um, I think the coach has got to get on board 100% as well. That a player feels comfortable coming to them and saying, "Coach, I just don't, you know,
Yeah.
have it." So, what can we do to kind of, you know, nudge coaches along to see the bigger picture and understand this is a big deal.
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, I'd say, when I said the bottom up, I think that for me, that means the coaches, right? Where it's acceptable, where a player knows, just like you described, and I think you said it very well, is when a player knows that you care about them as a person first. It's like being a parent, right? If I yell at my kids and they know there's a good reason for it, and they know I care about them, so they can bounce back from that, right? I think what coaches don't realize is that it's a lot of times it's just about the performance, right? The idea that there's a human being with feelings underneath that little body, inside that little body. It's not, there's not the awareness of that, right? It's all more about the coach's ego than it is about the development of the young person, right? And I coach sports for years, and I'm also guilty of yelling at players. But the reason why I yell at them is not because they make a mistake. It's because they're not trying hard enough, or they're not treating somebody with respect, or they're not treating their teammate with respect, right? It's controllable things, character things. Like, to
Yeah,
me, that's worthy of maybe having to raise your voice to make sure they understand it's important. But when we're yelling about mistakes, and we're yelling about, these little minute details that go on in a baseball game that 10 years from now isn't going to matter to anybody, then it's just a self-serving exercise. And I think one of the biggest challenges we see in the United States specifically with coaching is there's really no process for certification. There's no clearinghouse that says you're qualified to be a coach, because we're so decentralized. And listen, there's so many good volunteers out there. There's so many good paid instructors, but it's sort of the luck of the draw, right? It's like who you get is who you get. And not every coach is taught first that, hey, your job is to develop the young person from a socio emotional perspective, and to get them to perform. That's really the second responsibility. It's not first. We live in a world where it's flip flop. Coaches are taking credit for winning games, and people are selling their travel teams based on wins and losses. They're selling their travel teams based on what their uniforms look like. They're selling the travel teams based upon where they're going, and not like, hey, you should come to my program because I'm going to develop your young man or woman, and I'm going to make sure that they learn how to play the game the right way, and they have principles and values that are going to be passed on and are going to stick with them beyond sport. Like that's not sexy or attractive. No one's like, hey, I'm going to go to the club where they go 0-20 and my kid, gets his brains beat in, but he's going to learn how to be a great person. But why not? Right. But that's just not the way the world we live in. And so I think there's some element of education that may never come. Right. But I think there's a lot of unqualified coaches because they just don't have the emotional intelligence and they don't have the knowledge and awareness of how to treat a young person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. A friend of mine, actually a mentor of mine, we were having a similar conversation, and I forget exactly how he put it, but he was talking about you need to be certified uh, to dig a hole and put a casket in the ground, but
Right.
someone who's going to go out and influence our young people can just hop out of the car and do it. And it is actually pretty unique to the United States, which is really unbelievable. When you look at like Denmark and places over in Europe, there's a lot of levels of certification that a coach needs to go through before they
Yep.
step out onto the field. And it's amazing, like how are we missing that, like how are we missing that there aren't, and I think probably US soccer is probably ahead of the learning
Those are
curve
the best. Yes, I agree.
than anyone yet. But man, when you start talking like baseball and softball, there's like these so many fragmented between USSSA and ASA and you know Little League, Babe Ruth, all these different fragments, but yet nobody's taken the lead on making sure that these coaches are qualified to be dealing with young men and women. And I get it to an extent, like it's tough to get, when the core of your coaching, um, you know, pipeline is volunteers, like you're already asking them like, hey, can you come and give, 100 hours of your time for the season or a lot more? And by the way, before you start doing that, we need you to go attend, 10 hours of classes. So I get it to an extent, but I also don't get it because like that's a small price to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to tell a story. It's probably back in about 2007 or 2008. I was invited to go down and speak at the National Alliance of Youth Sports Convention in San Antonio, Texas. And as being a speaker there and a presenter there, I was also allowed to just partake of the event as well.
Mm-hmm.
The keynote speaker was Emmett Smith, and I definitely wanted to hear Emmett Smith talk. And when he opened up his speech, um, he started talking about the influence that coaches have on young people, and said that the most influential coach that I had in my career was, and I can't remember. I wish I would have wrote it down. I can't remember his name, but it was basically Emmett's first Pop Warner football coach.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't Barry Switzer or Jimmy Johnson. It was the first coach that ever saw him play in shoulder pads, and to hear that from a guy who was Hall of Fame, you know, arguably the best running back who ever stepped on an NFL field,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't tell you what your influence is as a coach. Nothing will.
Right.
So, somehow we do have to make that, philosophical change that, yeah, we're asking you a lot of time, but we do need this as well. We need you to go to this, I mean, geez, even if it's a 2 hour course, it's still better than nothing. It's not where we need to get, but it's better than nothing.
Well, I think what you've described is right. You're putting up a filter, right? As soon as you put up any sort of time requirement in terms of training or what have you, certification, like it's going to weed out a lot of volunteers who are just doing it for the wrong reasons, right? The people who want to coach for the right reasons are going to do it. And not only are they going to do it, they're not going to do it begrudgingly. They're going to do it because they want to gain the knowledge to be a better coach because they're getting into it because they care about the young people. I think what ends up happening a lot of times with these leagues, and some of this is just anecdotal from my own experiences, they can't get enough coaches to begin with. And so it's like, well, are we going to require these people to go and do, this time? And we're not going to have any coaches. So we're just not going to have a league. Unfortunately, I think part of that is benevolent in the sense that, like, well, we would rather have the kids play, even if we don't have, even if we only have like warm bodies there to coach. But I think part of it is money, right? Like, if we don't run this program, we don't get money. And if we don't get money, we're not going to be able to run it again. Right. So a lot of this is predicated on like making money. Right. And listen, let's not be naive. I mean, we all make money at some level off the industry and what we do, but there's value and then there's non-value, right? Like, what are you paying for? Are you paying for something valuable where you're getting something good back, or you're just paying to get access and not getting anything of value out other than time on a court or field or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you're right. I think it comes down to numbers, where really the qualifications for a lot of these organizations comes down to, okay, do you have a pulse?
Yes.
Is there warm air coming out beneath your nose? Like, go teach Johnny and Susie how to field a ground ball.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing I want to go back a little bit, as to one of the things you'd mentioned previously was, coming from an organization who did put a lot of emphasis on, we're going to coach and teach these kids life lessons that they can learn through the game. And talking about how that's, becomes unsexy to an extent. And I can speak firsthand from just when our organization first started, and, building on those values to later, toward the end of my tenure, the difficulty in us recruiting kids. And we won a lot. I mean, we went out and won 100+ team tournament in Las Vegas years ago. I mean, we had, kids that went on to play professionally, um, all kinds of stuff. But when you're going up against some of these organizations who are trying to, you know, not trying, but are convincing parents that, their son who throws 82 miles an hour and runs a 7.560, that they will get him a Division I college scholarship. Like, the parents are just so uneducated. They're chasing that carrot,
Sure.
and they're missing the point. And it got to be really frustrating, not only for me personally, but a lot of others, on our board and our coaches, who are like, the culture was changing so much and so fast. It was tough to swallow sometimes, to see us losing quality players to what we knew was an overall lesser package. Um, but then by the same token, we also got to a point and we were like, you know what, though, it is what it is. We still, we're still going to stick to our core values and do things the way that we want to do them. And, if there's something that's been a huge blessing, from myself and Sandy traveling, and I think I probably said this when I was on your show,
Mm-hmm.
being able to, reconnect with a lot of those old players of
Yeah.
mine and seeing, and again, just reiterating that, yeah, you know what, we were doing it the right way. These kids are productive members of society. They are, really, doing good things in the world at this point. So, you know, I sometimes, I try not to be cynical, but there's times where I think, is there hope for sports at this point? Like, can we change that culture? Like, it's gotten to a point. Another friend of mine, Jeff Potter, wrote a book a few years ago called "Whatever Happened to Baseball," and again, it just, talks about, and Jeff and I have the conversation many times. I've even had him on the show a couple times. Again, just kind of that lost spirit of what youth sports are really
Yeah.
supposed to mean. So, I'll ask you, is there hope? Can we turn this around? Can we change this culture?
Well, I'd like to think the answer is yes. I think it's a long road.
Yeah.
So when I was listening to your what you were just saying, like I couldn't help but think about reputation, right? So I know of one particular organization in my area, and I work with a bunch of kids who've played for the organization, and I've had probably four or five people tell me like they were not happy with the way things went and they pulled their kid out of the organization. And so, yes, you could sell anybody. Human nature is human nature, right? You're going to bait somebody with the idea that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And you can't, it's really hard to stop people from doing that, but they're going to learn their lesson. And I think in the youth sport industry, I certainly think there's an awareness and I think people see it, but there's not enough awareness to change the behavior. Meaning, like, we all see the problem from up here. Hey, look at, this is terrible. It's such a cesspool. But meanwhile, all of us, myself included, are still spending thousands and thousands of dollars every year to put our kids into travel sports. And we still have a mentality of like, well, if I don't put my son or daughter here, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to get left behind? And so you've got this industry that sort of just predicates itself. And so until people start taking a stand with their dollar, right? Like that's really the measure to me. Am I buying into this system and investing in it when I know it's toxic, right? Or can I just take a step back and put my dollars in the right places? I'm not saying like I'm not going to pull my kids out of sport. If they want to do it, they should do it. But I want to put them in the right place. And am I spending my resources on, some high level instructor, or am I spending it on mental health? Am I spending it on recovery? What am I spending it on? Right. And I think that, ultimately, if enough people continue to take that long view of the world of like, hey, this is more about the person developing into a good human being in adulthood and less about making them into a Division I scholarship recipient, then I think you've got something. But right now, we still live in a world where we spend tens of thousands of dollars by the time our kids get to college. And now we're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for kids to go to college. And there's really no detachment between that upfront investment about participating in youth sports, which should be about their happiness and enjoyment and development, and the connection between, well, I need to get an ROI at the college level by getting a scholarship. Otherwise, this other X number of dollars I spent for the last 10 or 12 years is wasted. Like that mentality not only contributes to the industry, but it also contributes to has an effect on the young people. The young people know and realize, the kids I work with and the kids I see around me, they know that their mom and dad are spending a lot of money. They know that their mom and dad are spending a lot of time. And even if mom and dad are supportive, they still feel the weight of like, it's on me to perform, to get something back for the family. And if I don't, I'm a failure, right? Even if parents aren't saying that, they may not say that, but kids still feel it because there's so much of an investment. And I think that that's frankly kind of led to the role of people like me to be able to defray that by having kids be able to talk about what's going on, unload the stress, understand how to have a different perspective, and then have some tools to kind of deal with the pressure that comes with playing at a very elevated level at a very early age.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think, you know, the truth is we didn't get to where we are overnight.
Yep.
So we're not going to fix it overnight as well, sadly. I just hope that you know, the cost in, um, you know, young people, the carnage of young people that is being left in this wake of what this youth sports industry has become. And who would have ever thought, um, and I think we're relatively close in age within 5 or 6 years or so, but who would have ever thought when we were kids it would be referring to the youth sports industry, you know?
Right.
But that
It's a good
is
point.
what it has become. And yeah, I mean, I just hope we can kind of change it sooner as opposed to later. But I think conversations like this are definitely a way to help it and bring awareness to it. I told parents, flat out that, we're looking into our program. I would tell them, I said, look, if you're looking at spending the type of money that you want to spend with us, um, in order to, get, like you said, a return on investment, I'm like that, you're not going to get it. Take that money and put it in a 529. Uh,
Right.
you're going to get a
Right.
much better
Exactly.
return on investment. But if you're looking to spend that money so that your child gets a more rounded and more fulfilling experience as a human being, um, then it's priceless at that point. And I think that's it. You just got to change those, expectations of what, like what you're doing this for. I mean, at the end of the day, um, I remember a friend of mine. Uh, he's now a scout with the Phillies, but he had coached in Division 3 for a long time. So obviously there's no athletic scholarship money. It was a private school, it cost quite a bit. And he told me stories of when he's sitting there having a conversation with parents at times, and they're he hawing back and forth about the cost, and
Mm.
realizing there's not a lot of scholarship money available, and understanding what it's going to cost them to send their son to this school to play baseball. Um, you know, he he would slide a sheet of paper over to him. He'd say, Mr. Huber, do me a favor. Write the amount that your son's happiness is worth on this piece of paper. And at that point, he knew the kid was coming to his school. And if parents start looking at that, they really truly understand that the investment is in their kid, not in their kid going to school, but in their kid being, then spend away, man. Like spend away. It's worth every penny if that's
Yes.
the reason you're spending that money. But if you're spending it in hopes that he or she's going to go on to play college athletics and then professionally, and all of a sudden he's going to get you know the Mike Trout money and going to buy you a big house on the coast. Not happening.
It's not. It's not. Just statistically, it's not happening. Listen, I think the other piece of this for me, as somebody who's in the sports psychology field, that's extremely important, is the motivation piece of this for the young person, right? To me, at least as a parent, to me, if my child comes to me and says, "I want to do this because it's important to me and because I want to get better," to me, that's a green light go, right? You want to do this, you're going to commit to it. It's important to you. That means you're going to invest and get the most out of it. If I have to push my kid to do something, to play a sport, to join this team, to do this extra work, to go to, private instruction, if they don't want to go and I'm making them go, then it's a total defeat, right? And so I think a lot of times one of the biggest issues I see, both from a professional standpoint in my work and as a parent, is this idea that, you know, kids don't know better, right? They don't know better, and that we know better, and we're the ones that are going to give them the answers because they're kids and we're adults. And I just do not subscribe to that. Obviously, there are things that kids don't know that we are here to help teach them, but coaching and teaching them isn't always telling them what to do.
Yeah.
It's helping them understand when they just fell on their face, or understanding, hey, you just tried this and you didn't get the result that you want. Why? Did you do something wrong? Or maybe you did nothing wrong. It just didn't work out. How am I going to deal with that? Right. And so coaching isn't always about pointing a finger and saying you did this wrong and criticisms. It's about helping the young person figure it out for themselves and give them the guidance to take that information and want to get better. And I think a lot of times that really gets lost. And there's this loss of autonomy, right? There's a sense of autonomy that kids don't have. And that's why I was working with a kid once who was not too long ago was a swimmer, and the parents came to me. They came to me as in the sort of in the framework of him being a competitive swimmer. And as I got to know the young man, we would talk, and he'd like, "Yeah, I love playing video games." And he's 15, 16 years old. Why do you love playing video games? Well, I can do what I want. No one's telling me what to do, right? I can experiment. I can play online with my friends. And it sort of was like a light bulb for me. Like kids like video games because there's nobody telling them what to do. Just like I don't want anybody telling me what to do. Right. And so like they want an experience where they can kind of frame it for themselves. And I think a lot of times in youth sport, that room does not exist. And I think that that's what causes kids to burn out. It causes the mental health issues. It causes them to quit, or it just causes them to put so much pressure on themselves, that it's defeating the purpose of playing the game. It's not a game anymore. It's a job. And, I think as adults, we have to learn to step back and say, you know what? You need to figure this out. I'm there if you fall down. I'll help pick you up and I'll help guide you along the way. But like, I can't do it for you. And I think if kids want to do something, then go spend away to your point. But if you're pushing them to do something that costs a lot of money and they're not interested, not only is it wasting your money, but you're also doing damage to that kid because you're not really respecting the way they feel and what they think.
Yeah. Yeah. And there does definitely seem to be, um, kind of a little bit more of a helicopter parent mentality nowadays where parents are, afraid to go, to let Johnny or Susie go out and fall on their face a couple times, and I mean that brings me back to something my mom told me, um, a long time ago in reference to parenting in general. She said God only requires us to do two things for our kids: teach them how to walk and teach them how to walk away. She said,
Hmm.
and the second one is a hell of a lot tougher than the first. And that is so true because we are constantly trying to protect our kids, we're trying to build a bubble around them. But the fact is, like, that's not life, man. They've got to go out and they got to, you know, get a bloody lip and skin up their knees and just live life. And like you said, we'll help you get up when you fall. If you need help getting up when you fall, we'll do that. We can't prevent. Parents have got to get out of this mentality that we can prevent our kids from falling because no matter what we do, they're gonna fall.
And to me, isn't that the beauty of sports? Like the beauty of sports is that it teaches you that you're not always going to win and
Yes.
that you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And, I think you take some of that out of it when you're trying to control for every last variable, right? Go play, right? Like if I watch a game and like there's people complaining, oh, this one, they're pushing, put, okay. So, it's not going to hurt you. It's a sport. Like if you don't want to get pushed, go play video games, go take up knitting, right? Sports are physical, right? That's not to say we should punch somebody in the face, but the referee's there to call it. Let them play. And if you get pushed around a little bit, so what? Right? Like we live in this world of like, it's not okay to push somebody, or it's like, oh, they're doing this to me. Referee, you need to make this call, as opposed to either, hey, I'm going to push him back, or I'm just not going to engage. Like we always have a choice in how we handle these situations. And it just befuddles me that there's everybody's always out there helicoptering trying to, to protect their kids when they'll just figure it out. They're smart, right? They're going to get it. They're going to figure it out. And if they don't this time, they'll get it the next time. That's the service we do them, is letting them solve those problems for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it. So, Mike, we're just about out of time. But anything that we didn't cover, we covered a huge space here. But anything that we didn't cover that you want to talk about before we get to my final question?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I always love to talk about the landscape. And I think it is important to talk about it. And there are different perspectives. I think what I would say is this. I think as I'm thinking about that question, Dan, is like there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? And what I mean by that is that I think I have an informed opinion about what needs to happen based upon what I do, but that doesn't make me right. Just as the same, like, your opinion is your opinion. And I think we can have an intelligent, open dialogue about ideas about how to do this. Right. And so if we do that, that's going to really help. And I think it's so many times there's so much ego involved in youth sport. That is the biggest downfall. Whether it's a coach, whether it's an organization, it's the athletes themselves. Ego gets in the way of growth. And I
Yeah.
think that that's probably the biggest challenge that we have is, winning and losing is ego. And there's a bigger picture to be served.
Yeah. And I love that, there's more than one way to skin a cat, because I know just throughout my coaching career, when I'd go to coaching clinics and stuff like that, like I would take a little bit from this instructor, and I'd take a little bit from this instructor.
Mm-hmm.
I'd take a little bit from this instructor. And, my coaching philosophy was just this huge, you know, mesh of everyone that I gathered information from. And, even with kids, is, if you're coaching a roster of, 15, 16 players, like, you literally have to have, 15 or 16 different coaching styles for every one of those kids. I mean, I remember I had a huge, uh, you know, wonderful blessing of being able to spend some time with Leo Mazzoni several years ago.
Wow.
He talked about, that incredible rotation that they had in the 90s. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like, they all had to be addressed differently. Like, Maddox was not Glavin, and Glavin was not Smoltz, and Avery was not any of them. Like, it was just like they all had their own ways. He goes, and then I'm dealing with Rocker. It was
Right.
totally different. Um, so this whole thing, this whole like one size fits all thing that we've come up with is just insane to me. And we really, again, I mean, there's things that I've learned from you in this conversation, and I'm hoping there's things you learned from me. Um, and that's the way we just have to go about this, is continuing to have dialogue and continuing to, raise awareness and address this, because it's starting to get out of hand.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So, Mike, how do people get a hold of you? If anybody wants to reach out to you to find out more about the Freshman Foundation, to find out more about your coaching services, how do they get a hold of you?
So I think probably the best place to go is my website, which is Michael V as in Vincent Huber.com. That has my contact information. It has all of my podcast episodes. It has all of my, articles that I've written. Is like pretty much everything is right there. So I would say go there. You could schedule time to talk to me if you're interested. Pretty much find out anything you need to find out about me to know what I'm about.
Absolutely. Cool. So that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song called Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things, then the whole world changes. What's one of the little things that Mike's doing to make the world a little bit better place?
You know, I think I'll tie it to what we were just talking about. I think one of the things that I do really well is I have the ability to meet young people where they're at, right? Similar to what you're talking about with Leo Mazzoni, right? Everybody's different. And I think building relationships with the athletes that I work with the young people that I work with, I think gives them the understanding that, hey, I can have a two-way relationship with an adult, and it doesn't have to always be like me listening to them. It can be, hey, I have a say in this. And I think that that's really important, because one of the things that I think is really critical for young athletes, and I teach this, is learning empathy. Just as the coach needs to understand each person, each player individually, the player needs to understand that the coach coaches a lot of different people and has a lot of different responsibility. And you need to understand that it's hard for them too, and that you need to take responsibility for yourself, which means if you want something to be different, you have the choice to make it different. And I think a lot of times young people don't feel that way. And so that's really something I work hard on contributing, is to let them know that it's a two-way street and they feel like they can have a voice in their own development, because I think a lot of young people just don't feel that way.
It's beautiful. I love that. I love that. Mike, I really appreciated this. This is a great conversation. I have a feeling we might be doing a couple more podcasts together in the future.
I would love that. I would love that, Dan.
I don't know how Joe Rogan does a 3-hour podcast, but I can certainly turn it into one. So we got to like cut it and say, hey, we'll get together down the road again. But folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com or danclouser.com. And be sure to hop on over to Amazon, pick up a copy of my latest book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1. And Mike, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Dan. Same here. I appreciate it.
Yeah.